just a little background as to all of the things that Adam has done. You know, through his work with the groups Mandingo Griot Society, Eternal Wind, Moving Pictures, Hue Vibrational, and the Go Organic Orchestra, as well as his 2005 book, Pure Rhythm, Adam Rudolph has helped establish a common language for musicians of many continents. Rudolph's associations with globally minded masters of the improvised tradition, often referred to as jazz, most deeply in his decades-long studies and recordings with Don Cherry and Yusuuf Lateef, has made his work a key component in erasing the borders of musical genres. Adam's collaborations with Dr. Lateef, which began in 1988 and lasted for the next 25 years, were especially influential on how Rudolph engaged the creative process. This shared idea of how many cultures create one world has also fostered the long relationship between Adam Rudolph and the World Music Institute. As Bryce said, in 1987, Adam and WMI launched the Improvisations series, which featured musicians from various backgrounds and cultures collaborating and creating new music together. Over the next 20 years, Improvisations shows throughout New York hosted the likes of Muhal Richard Abrams, Amina Claudine Myers, Ed Blackwell, Randy Weston, the World Saxophone Quartet, and some of the folks that Bryce also mentioned, playing with musicians from all over the world. This is work that Adam Rudolph continues to engage in. He recently released the album Symphonic Tone Poem for Brother Yusuuf, composed and recorded with the great woodwind player Benny Maupin. And September will see the release of his new book, Sonic Elements, Matrices, Cosmograms, and Ostinatos of Circularity. And of course, Saturday, September 10th, we'll see Adam bring a special version of the Go Organic Orchestra to New York Central Park for a free concert at Summer Stage. That night, he will musically direct and spontaneously conduct a big band set to feature an incredible cross-generational lineup. That will include the Moroccan Nawa master Hassan Hakmoun, harpist Brandy Younger, saxophonist Dave Liebman, cornet player Graham Haynes, vibraphonist Joel Ross, trombonist Peter Zumo, members of Brooklyn Raga Massive, and many, many others. The Central Park concert will also mark the relaunch of Rudolph's improvisation series with the World Music Institute. So there's a lot for us to talk about. Our talk will last about 50 minutes. And there will be time for Adam to answer your questions as well at the end. So please add them to the Q&A in the Zoom. Adam, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here and thanks.
So I kind of want to go in somewhat of a chronological order in terms of talking to you about your career and your practice. But by all means, you don't have to stay in chronological order. It might be more fun if you make us jump around from era to era and world to world. But I definitely wanted to start at the beginning. You know, one of the things about your career that has always fascinated me has been how you brought together these ideas of improvisation that I generally think of, being in America for a long time, as being born of jazz, and then instruments and rhythms from around the world. And my question is, which came first for you, the jazz education or the fascination of the sounds from around the globe? Or did they come at the same time? And what were the models for what you wanted to do when you were younger and learning as a musician?
That's a great question. I'll try and sort of make it brief.
You don't need to. Get into it.
I mean, there's anyway. I was born and raised in an area of the south side of Chicago called Hyde Park, and it was a really kind of a special neighborhood, and it was a special era as I entered into my teenage years. Of course, everything starts in the home, and my father owned practically every so-called jazz record there was up until 1955, which was the year I was born, and I guess there were other things economically pressing at that time. But incredible collection, And so grew up in that kind of atmosphere. But the neighborhood itself was amazing. The south side of Chicago, was really interesting. It was a destination of part of the Great Migration, and so the really the pervasive and beautiful richness of the culture really resonated with the Black Atlantic African American culture. Um, so growing up, even by the time I was 13, 14, you could go hear Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and Otis Spann on Sunday afternoons if you were underage. Um, and then at the same time, one of my high school music teachers was friends with Leroy Jenkins. So I remember Muhal brought a sextet to my high school to play. The same high school, by the way, that where George Lewis and Ray Anderson both went.
Oh wow.
Um, and then actually Joseph Jarman came and did a workshop, an amazing workshop for our high school class where one of these had all these instruments and they were showing slides and he had a stack of, this was in the days when you would bring your lunch in a little brown paper sack. So we had a stack of these sacks and had everybody cut out the eye holes and we put them over our heads. And her name is slipping my mind now, but Lester Lashley's wife was a dancer with the ACM and she was leading us around. So these were, these were the experiences, the environment. I used to go out to a place called The Point, which is the promontory, a grassy area at 55th Street, right on Lake Michigan. And actually, that's where I met Joseph Jarman, even before I played music or knew he played music. And that was it was a hippie period too. Hyde Park was like that was going on. And Hyde Park was also fascinating because the University of Chicago was there. And so right down the street from me was the International House. So there were people from all over the world lived there also. So this very incredible blend, a mix of people. So out there were drummers. I had done classical piano as a kid and was already kind of into composing my own pieces. But when I went out there and the drummers, these were great drummers, Jeff Recklaw and some of the drummers from the Pharaohs, which was a pre Earth, Wind and Fire, post Phil Koran, post Sun Ra, this kind of lineage going on there. Anyway, and eventually, you get your turn to play. And I don't know, man, the drum, we connected. I could do it. It wasn't sort of a logical choice. It wasn't a really great, easy to path of a career choice. But as we say, the drum called me, and I can't really say more than that. But it pulled me in, and so I began studying more about the everything I could learn about hand drums and about music as a whole. I'd been listening to, of course, a lot of the musicians from that period of the records I had were opening themselves up to other musics and expanding the orchestration. So, I mean, people like Don Cherry, you mentioned, and Alice Coltrane and John Coltrane, Pharoah Sanders, and Miles Davis, and many more. Herbie Hancock's Sextet, Weather Report, McCoy Tyner. We're really expanding the orchestration, also expanding the language of really starting to work and bring in elements of musical cultures. I would say that one of the biggest influences, however, was the Art Ensemble of Chicago. They were in Chicago then. They had just come back from Paris. I went to a concert of theirs at Idenoise Hall. I think I was 14 or 15. I don't know. And it just was like, this has got to be the most amazing thing ever. The room was full of instruments and they went everywhere. I mean, the journey they took us on was incredible. And that was really inspiring. So sort of the way of answering your question was that they were completely, it wasn't either or, it was both and. It was a complete, constantly wanting to learn and study more about all kinds of music from around the world. And you could go downtown to Rose Discount Records and you could buy all of the Akora records and Ethnic Folkways. And so I started just, rolling, this cover looks good, and just started doing research that way. Met a tabla teacher at the local Vivekananda Center. Um, Started tabla there, um, and started studying hand drums with a great drummer who had moved from New York. There wasn't a lot of Black Atlantic drumming at that time in Chicago. The drumming that was going on at the point was it was the culturally, I guess, African American drumming that was really particular to the neighborhood almost, So just wanting to study and learn more, and just, following threads, following my intuition. My intuition, interestingly, um, right from the get-go, was that I wanted to study hand drums and play hand drums,
Mm-hmm.
learn as all I could about the traditional drumming. But right from the get-go, I thought, I want to play these. I wonder how you could play these in contemporary music. I mean, like I said, I was, the drummers I was growing up hearing, Robert Shai and Ajaramu playing with, Gene Ammons and these great drummers, and Marshall Thompson and Wilbur Campbell, and then hearing everybody come into town. My father took me to hear Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Mongo Santa Maria, Stan Getz, Max Roach. So I was, um, that was going on too. So that's kind of, so I was going to say, so on hand drums, I was like, well, how could you develop a language on hand drums that reflected and where you could play this music? I started listening to Tony Williams and Elvin Jones a lot, for example. I was like, how could that be adapted on hand drums? So in that sense, even as I studied traditions, I've always been an autodidact in terms of composition and developing my language on hand drums.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did you find people to play with? And I guess maybe I'm jumping just a little bit further. The first record that I know you to be on is the Mandingo Griot Society record. How did you how did you come together with Don and Fodeo Sosa? I'm sorry, I'm
Well, so actually that record, if you go, so that brings me to a really important point, is that this music, uh, sometimes people call it jazz, African American improvisational music, spontaneous composition music. Um, Up until recently was primarily an oral tradition, ORAL,
mhm,
and that is where the younger musicians, when they would have an opportunity to perform in an ensemble of an elder musician, um, that's where you really receive transmission of really profound, oftentimes profound, the real deal, creative attitude, the spiritual dynamic of the music. Um, as well as, of course, knowledge and experience.
mhm,
So my first person I played with in Chicago, and the first record I made, which was actually long before Mandingo Griot Society, was with a gentleman named Malawi Nerudin, who's one of the great tenor players in Chicago. Um, and then through him, I started with him when I was 16.
mhm,
And then through him, Fred Anderson used to come and sit in with us. And so I started playing with Fred. At the same time, through my studies at Oberlin, I met Charles Moore, and he started, and Herb Boyd, and Charles started inviting me up to Detroit at the age of 17. So the first record I made was actually with Malawi on Strata Records. It was at the age of 16 or 17. I just turned 17. And then about a month before that, it just came out as a record called The Black Hole. I had performed at the Ann Arbor Blues and Jazz Festival with uh, this contemporary jazz quintet with
mhm,
Kenny Cox and Charles Moore.
mhm,
And so I sort of feel like I had two schools in that Detroit and Chicago
What great
which of course
schools.
are overlapping. But yeah, really grateful. But just again to just emphasize that this oral tradition and this idea of mentoring and kind of the generosity of it, and it makes me kind of always remember that the music, it doesn't belong to anyone, it's there. And that, but we have this incredible cultural lineage and this kind of generosity of things that they're passed on. And it's not the style of the music that's passed on, it's the a way of approaching elements, a way of having a certain creative attitude, which an openness to cultivating intuition, um, having a fearlessness and a courageousness that when you can imagine something that you pursue it,
Hmm.
which is something that a lot the AACM really showed. I mean, now they're so much part of the canon that but at the time, it was, they were really breaking new ground. The idea of pushing the boundaries was so really important value to all of those mentors I had, those early ones, and then later. But whatever you can imagine, the other thing is studiousness. And that was, of course, in Chicago, but I really got a real better feeling of that being around Charles Moore and Kenny Cox and Ralph Jones, the musicians in Detroit, because they were so studious, about looking into like, you know, Schillinger and Slanemsky, and also listening to music from different cultures and whatnot. Later, I came to realize that the person who really set the tone for that Detroit way of approaching things, their mentor, Benny Maupin's
Hmm.
mentor, everybody, is Yusuuf Lateef, who
Hmm.
then later I had this grateful to have this incredible relationship with him.
Hmm. Tell tell me about, before we get to Yusef, which I absolutely want to dive into your relationship with him. Um, Tell me about meeting, how you met Don Cherry, who was your first, to my mind's eye, he was your first main teacher.
Well, I said, well, I
When you
think, but let's, yeah, but I'm trying to tell you that when time I met Don, I was off and running,
yeah,
and thanks
okay,
to these musicians, artists in Chicago and Detroit,
right,
who I'm speaking about,
right,
and that's the interesting thing because Fred Anderson and Malawi never came to New York,
right.
but when you start to look at it, the musicians who came through their groups, Jerome Cooper and Jack DeJohnette and Rufus Reed, and I don't know, I don't even want to make the list, but it's profound,
Yeah,
so
no,
this idea of staying in sharing. But Don, just to make it really briefly, when I finished school in 77, I moved to Ghana. I lived in Ghana for a
uh-huh.
year. I went there. I didn't know a soul when I went there. It was incredible. Went all the way up to Mali and the Dogon, and what a that I mean, we could talk for hours about that because that really was a huge, hugely impactful and beautiful transformational experience. I met Fode Musasuso, who was a griot, a Jali from the Gambia, who actually had been brought by Nketiah to teach in Ghana, and he's a keeper of the Mandingo musical traditions. And it was right around the time Roots came out, and we were like, man, let's go start a band, and
Hmm.
let's go back to the States. So we when our we eventually did, and then I had been listening to Don Cherry all along. He asked about how I got into world music. Well, if anybody picked up Relativity Suite, for example, um, that's the prototypical record for that,
Hmm.
one of them. So Bruce Kaplan, who ran Flying Fish Records, which was primarily a bluegrass oriented record, he heard us at Fred Anderson's place called the Birdhouse.
Hmm.
And so that's a connection. Fred gave us our first gig. Bruce came, he offered us a record deal. And I was like, Bruce, I would really like to invite Don Cherry to play on this record. He's like our hero. And he was like, cool. And I don't even remember how I got Don's number. Called him up in Sweden, and he was like, I'll come. And he came. And that was a whole beautiful week making that record with him at Curtis Mayfield's studio. And then Don said to Hamid and I, Hank at that time, why don't you guys come over? He was telling us all about the schoolhouse he had in the
Mm-hmm.
Swedish countryside with Moki and his
Mm-hmm.
children. Come over there and we'll play some gigs. And we were like, cool. We just made a little money making this record. So we did. So we went over there. We lived in his house for several months. And then we went on tour. We ended up playing in Paris. We did a few nights there in a group with also included Charlie Hayden and Trelock. I think had never played with them before. And Lateef Khan and a great French saxophonist, Dudu Gorian, and a magician who had studied magic in Indonesia, and then from there, so that's how I met Don, and then that was the beginning of that relationship.
Right
Mm-hmm.
on, right on. It's interesting to hear my experience of Fred Anderson as a mentor is just to hear all the people that came through the Velvet Lounge about 20 years later. So it's
Yeah.
very, very interesting to hear your experience that he was already doing this in with the Birdhouse and
Well, it was the Birdhouse way back, and then we would play for years. He would play, wasn't his place. He would play at this. Oh man, the name just went out of my mind. But we would play. It was in Old Town, and we would start at midnight at Saturday night because it was run by this religious cult who they wore all blue, like the Foundation Church, I think they were called or something. So we would start right when they finished and play till 5, 6 in the morning. And Fred was so beautiful, he would let everybody come and sit in, and we'd play Hamid and myself, Felix Blackman, the bass player, and play all night. So Fred was always about finding a place to keep the music going and share the music and develop the music. Same thing like these brothers in Kenny Cox and John Sinclair
Mm-hmm.
and Charles Moore in Detroit. They opened up the Strata Gallery.
Yep.
And really, this idea of self-determination was really so significant, and the idea of developing community that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. Um, so you mentioned Dr. Lateef as being a mentor to a lot of these folks in Detroit, the younger folks in Detroit. Um, you told me that you first met him when your group Moving Pictures came to play with him in 1988.
Yeah,
Um,
so let's begin our gratitude to the World Music Institute in general and Robert Browning in particular. Um, uh, Robert always had this amazing vision of, I think, world music being means not like something other, but we all live in the world,
right,
So,
right.
so um, Yusuuf had been living in Nigeria for 4 years and had come back and didn't really feel like starting a band. I don't know. But I was working at that time with Charles Moore and Ralph Jones and Federico Ramos. We had a group called Eternal Wind, and we made some connection. We made 3 records also for Flying Fish. We made a
Mm-hmm.
connection with Yusuuf, and he invited us to play his first concert that he did since he had returned from Nigeria, along with Cecil McBee. So at that time in '88, I was actually subletting Don Cherry's loft. So this is these connections and living there. And actually, so the first time I talked to Yusuf, but for the first time I met him was in Don Cherry's loft. And the first concert I ever did with Yusuf was this World Music Institute concert at Symphony Space. And Cecil McBee, but I say that Cecil McBee was the bass player.
Mm-hmm.
So we rehearsed in Don's loft, and Yusuf, what an amazing guy. I mean, he asked us to bring in music. We played some of my compositions, and he was really into what the Eternal Wind was doing, and was a beautiful concert. Um, yeah, so that was the beginning of 25-year friendship, um, mentorship. Uh, Anybody who's met Yusuuf knows what a incredible artist he is, and radiant human being that he became even more so over the years. A real uh, full of light and love.
Did you have a spiritual common ground? Did you have a musical common ground? How did the conversation between the two of you begin?
Well, Yusuf and I ended up the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years. We talked on the phone once, twice, three times a week about everything. He was a Renaissance person. He introduced me. He sent me a book once, I and Thou by Martin Buber, and I read it and we talked about it. I sent him a book by John Dewey, Art is Experience, and he read it. We talked about that. Um, he was into painting. I was into painting. Um, uh, um, we would talk. He would tell me things about intervals, way of organizing intervals, musical intervals.
Mm-hmm.
He never ran out of different ideas. So we would talk about very specific musical things. We'd both be at our pianos sometimes, but also the the idea of the spiritual. I just want to step back for a second and say that as the great Congo scholar Bunseki Fukiao said, "We're born spiritual, we learn religion." And but I would, and I've thought about that a lot, and then I could even take that another step further because spiritual is also something that people think a lot of different things when they hear that word. And to me, I think the essential quality of it um, has to do with the idea of wonderment,
Mm-hmm.
which is related to inspiration, related to awe, related to intuition, related to love, and so wonderment, the sense of the aliveness that we can have at moments.
The spirit of the world.
So yeah, exactly. So but I'll just back up for a second. Also, Yusuf taught me something very early on. This is what I mean about transmission. If you were open around these great masters like Yusuf Lateef and Don Cherry, and I don't know, I'm sure Sun Ra, I didn't work with Sun Ra, but got you could learn everything because they were always sharing in a way that would crack you open to something new, a new doors opening up. Anyway, so when I first met Yusuf, so 88, and then I was living in Venice, Los Angeles area. And, so we didn't talk so often. I'd call him after 2 or 3 months and he'd like, how you doing? Yeah, and everything's good. How are you? And, we were planning maybe to do some more concerts together. And I said, what have you been doing? And he'd like, well, I just finished this string quartet and I have this new record coming out and I'm making another record. And, I'm just like, man, this work ethic is really something, and I was always a hard worker and studious, but I was like, I think I can step up my game here a little bit. And and I did, it made me realize, as Yusuf would always say, the cliche, keep on stepping, that's a valuable, being in motion. Like if you move your body to keep it fluid and supple, and same thing with the mind and the spirit too, right?
Yeah. You know what? I was just in Detroit, and I have to say that there's something very Detroit about that as well. This idea of like never stop working and never stop working for yourself.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and that work ethic is, it's beautiful. And then later on, when I connected with some of the AAC musicians and started performing with them, like Wadada, Leo Smith, and Hall and Henry, I've never played with, but I know it's the same thing.
Mhm.
It's like you decide what you want to put your energy into, and what gives you joy. And uh, um, so yeah, so Yusuf, we did many. He was very generous. He invited me to do a lot of large ensemble collaborations with him that,
Mhm.
in and of themselves, were creative endeavors. I've mentioned this in other times too, but just to say, when actually this was also a world music related event. We in the year 2000, he was invited um, by World Music, and also I think Tom Buckner were collaborating. Robert Browning was producing it at Avery Alice Tully or one of those places for his 80th birthday. Anyway, and he asked me to co-compose a lot of the music, and we had done that before, where we had written each for different parts of the ensemble. This time he said, "Okay, I'm going to write for the first." This was for a 12-piece group or 8, I think. I'm going to write for the first. He had a formula. He had worked on 15 bars, and you're going to write the next 17, and I'll write the next 19, and then you write the next 15 again, or something like that. So that's what we did. And I mean, sort of the generosity. This is a high profile. I mean, he doesn't. It wasn't even about that. You know, it was about everything was about creative opportunity
Mm-hmm.
and pushing the boundaries. As I said, experimenting, trying new things, having the natural courage to like not be, that you're going to try something and not everything works. That idea of experimentalism, building on new things, reaching for new things, and having the courage to do that. You know,
Yeah.
really inspiring person. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I mean, I read a piece you wrote about him in, I think, Jazz Times, where you called him your most important teacher, and that sort of stuck with me as to be able to have lived a life as full as you have with so many creative inputs from so many different places to still be able to say something that direct.
Well, nothing comes from, I mean, like I said, the music is there. It doesn't belong to everybody. And
Right.
these mentors, I mean, the idea of sharing, you want it to be alive,
Yeah.
and so you share it, you pass it on. And Yusuuf, teacher it's almost like teacher in the greatest sense of educating, bringing forth and sharing, and more transmission, even because the most important things, although I learned so much from him about intervals and composition and ways of how to, but it was more, I think of it sometimes more like it was more not so much what I learned, but sort of how,
Mm-hmm.
how you can invent. Like from Yusuff, I learned, or it reinforced me the idea that when you can generate new processes, new processes of putting your music together, your music is going to be prototypical.
Uh-huh.
Um, this is something I read about also later, that in an interview with Richard Serra talked about that. So this idea of inventing processes. Um, so the idea of creative attitude, and also Yusuff used to say, um, like for example, when he taught me uh, the triple diminish, about what's called triple diminish, which I won't uh, go into now, but he learned it from Don Bias, and he said this is the fascinating. So you can do this, 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 and this, and he says, but then whatever I write, it has to serve the heart. So it had to have this quality, what I call a yogic quality. He called it autophysiopsychic. I call it
Mm-hmm.
organic music now myself, but that has this feeling, that has this yogic yoking of body, uh, mind, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think this, for me, actually connects so profoundly to what we're going to do in September, because the Go Organic Orchestra started as my uh, it's my attempt to kind of share a lot of these things with, and open up to a lot of other musicians. And so yeah.
Talk a little bit about Go Organic Orchestra and this idea of working with big bands of spontaneous improvisers. How did you develop your concept for it? I know that there have been a number of people. I'm mostly thinking of Butch Morris, who have done similar things, at least from take a step back of people doing conducting of improvisers and interacting. Tell me how you developed the idea for Go Organic Orchestra.
Well, that's a I I didn't know, I had no idea about Butch Morris when I started doing this in California,
Okay.
the first organic orchestra. Um, and I love Butch, became a good friend, and he came and heard me, and I saw him, and so on. And he actually gave a lot of the credit of his inspiration from Lucas Foss, who
Uh-huh.
did a lot of improvisational conducting. But man, you know, I used to see Muhal, Richard Abrams direct the big band, the experimental band that way, Sun Ra, even Dizzy Gillespie. Um, what I do, I think what I do and what I'm really thinking about, the reason we can do what we're gonna what this organic orchestra with this collaboration with all these musicians from different parts of the world that we're doing at the summer stage is that the conception of it was always to try and create a forum where any musician from any background could participate in an ensemble together without really sacrificing the real essential quality of voice of what they had to contribute, but doing it in another kind of context. So, for example, um, at the summer stage, you know, the members of the Brooklyn Raga Massive are going to be there, who I've been working with the last few years. Great masters of North and South Indian Raga. Hassan Hakmoon, who of course I worked with Don Cherry, um, Dave Liebman. So, but even the musicians in the Go Organic Orchestra who are performing in September, they themselves, I mean, they come from, I think, at least 9 or 10 different countries,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and even the musics that they've studied. We have everybody playing tambeen, Sylvan. I can't name I don't want to name anybody because then I can't name everybody, if that makes sense. But tambeen flute, the Guinea Fulani flute, great Brazilian percussionist, bata drummer, um, uh, the Nokan Japanese flute is going to be there. Um, and there's more. I'm not even, you know, different African horns, all these things, you know, so like that.
Uh-huh. And did you compose music? Did you create music that is specific for the show? How did you go about thinking about what the program there was going to be?
So it's always about the musicians, you know, and so
Uh-huh.
my we're so what I do, as you mentioned about the conducting, it's what I call spontaneous conducting, and there's a 3-page score, and that's made up of sonic elements, interval systems, and cosmograms, and my rhythm concept of cyclic verticalism, I call it. Anyway, all of these elements are kind of like work as a sort of DNA, and can be put together spontaneously in all kinds of ways based upon how my feeling is of interpreting what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when Hassan Hakmoon and his brother Abdurrahim, first of all, we have a chemistry together. We've been playing together since '88. But when I hear him, then I can be inspired to conduct the orchestra in a particular way. Or when Dave Liebman, if I cue Dave Liebman to improvise um, based upon what he's hearing, well, it's not a composition in the sense that we have to go here. It's a roadmap, but you can always leave the roadmap. There's detours, and maybe you never come back, you know? And so if Liebman's playing something and I start conducting the orchestra and we go somewhere, then that influences him. Same thing like how I would dialogue with somebody when I'm playing my hand drums with Liebman or Hassan or somebody. But in this case, it's this whole incredible orchestra, and these musicians now we've been together now for since 2015. Most of them have been with me. It's a real community of artists with a shared vision. So they're almost kind of inside of my head. They kind of know what I'm going to do almost before I do it, which I always try and sabotage that too, right? But no, I mean, I don't try to do anything. It's this idea, but it's a lot of fun. One of the things, if people come to this concert, when they come, one of the things they're going to really that I enjoy, and a lot of audience members have come and said one of the funnest things is to watch the musicians and the orchestra, the faces on the look on their faces when they're watching the other musicians spontaneously compose, in other words, improvising,
Mhm.
because everybody's so incredible in their own thing. And so it's really fun to watch this whole thing unfold in the moment. Now but it's not just from nothing. There's these score materials. We've been working together. There's a chemistry there. So it has a groundation, but the actual manifestation of what's going to happen in September is going to be about the whole energy of the moment and the whole community of everybody who's there, not just the people playing, but also the audience,
Yeah.
because we feel the energy of everything. I mean, even to, and that's so beautiful. That's what we love, love, love about live music, and we miss it, miss it. And this is like everybody in the orchestra and all the new guest artists, Joel Ross and Brandy Younger, and uh, and then our old time friends like Hassan, Hakmoon, and Liebman, and we're all just super excited to get together and create this,
Yeah,
this new
absolutely.
piece. This could be a new piece. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to kind of go through the lineup and see folks who were part of the improvisation series, such as Hassan and Dave, um, and and adding newer people, younger people like Marcus and Joel Ross.
Mark, yeah.
Um,
Well, this is the thread. This is what I'm speaking about. It's like we don't come from anything, and of course, I mean, I was a youngin on these
yeah.
improvisation series. I was like probably the youngest guy up there. And so uh, you know, you're around. Well, Hassan's younger than me, so. But anyway, um, but being around, Zakir Hussain and Shankar and Don and Blackwell and Olan Tunji and one of my drum mentors, Big Black, and all of this on and on, like just it turned me out. It was always these improvisation things for me as experiencing it as a young musician were like, what a thrill. Um, so of course, there's new generation coming. Marcus Gilmore is incredible drummer. He's Graham's nephew. Roy Haynes' grandson. Uh, you know, um, and Joel, a beautiful vibraphonist, and Brandy Younger, who's already been so involved with the Brooklyn Raga Mass of
Mhm,
people
mhm.
already, and she's really tight with Mia, the harp player who's in the orchestra. So we're going to have two harps. I'm like, and I know we're going to do something with two harps, but what it's going to be and how it's going to unfold until I hear it, you know, hear them, we'll see what happens. Same thing, Hassan with Samarth, the great North Indian singer, Arun Ramamurthy, Jay Gandhi, these incredible musicians, when they, how are they going to respond? Like when we did the Ragmala record, with the Brooklyn Raga Massive, I knew. So part of my job is having the intuition about things.
Right.
So I knew Samarth, being an incredible North Indian singer, would really inspire Hassan singing, who's already a great singer, you know. But I know
Mhm.
Hassan loves Hindustani singing. So it was like, boom. And sure enough, those tracks are amazing. And so we're going to, of course, touch on those things, but how it's going to how it'll unfold this time, um, we'll see. And the other thing I want to mention is about rhythm. Is like a big part of my music, and the music that how I mean Malawi Nuruddin, Charles Moore, they were rhythmists, and I was really learned so much from them. So this rhythm concept that I use called cyclic verticalism, um, not to sound esoteric, but it's just basically combining the layering kind of verticality you have in uh, West African. Actually, the root of it is the Aka and Baka, the so-called pygmy people. This
Mhm.
this idea of layered rhythms, moving like this, with cycles that I was exposed through my studies of tabla, especially with Pandit Tarannath Rao for 20 years. The rhythm cycles of additive twos and threes. So combining these, I make these bigger and bigger forms, or what I call ostinatos of circularity. And but they have to groove. And the thing is that I don't. Once my musicians learn them, they learn these signal rhythms. they can come, we develop them again and again. So for me, it has to have the body, the as George Clinton would call it, the booty aspect of it in there is like, because big respect for that, right? And
Especially in Central Park.
yeah, right. So that's there too. Well, Thelonious Monk said, you can dance to my music,
Yeah.
right?
I think of free jazz as the best dance music there is.
Yeah.
Um, um, Adam, I think that we are sort of coming close to the end of it, and I wanted to start. There was one question about how you put together the program at Central Park. I think we've touched upon that. There's
Well, actually,
another.
well, I could, if I could actually, can I address that a little bit?
Sure, sure.
Because I did actually, really important. I wanted to, one of the things that has been really a pleasure is working with Bryce. And I think Bryce has really, you talk about lineages, and I
Uh-huh.
think he really sort of his catching something of the real spirit of how Robert Browning had this openness, and the initial impetus of World Music Institute being open to all music without boundaries.
Sure.
So Bryce, when he had the intuition to call me, and then as he and I together went back and forth about how, who might be good and what would work, and and it was great when I kind of came to this idea of the organic orchestra. I was about to say it, and then he suggested it first, and I was like, all right, we're really in tune here.
Oh,
And he
fantastic.
also was completely on board with, I said right from the get-go, I said, I want to do this, but we don't want to just try and redo what we did then. This music has to reflect now. I mean, this
Hmm.
idea of people blending world musics and all these things, that the trite way of putting it, but it's 30 years later. So where are we now? How much have we developed? How much everybody's living here now? I mean, everybody's, this whole generation of travel, and it's people in our community. I mean, it's called Brooklyn Raga Massive. These
Hmm.
cats live in Brooklyn, right? So, um, that he was like kind of really right away understood this idea that we want to create something fresh and new, because that's how you respect the elders and your mentors, is by doing not what they did, but how they did, you see, and really
Absolutely.
reaching for something. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be reaching for something. It's going to be so exciting. I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, no, I very much am as well. Bryce wanted me to mention that Angel Bat Dawid, who is a great Chicago musician, who was also one of the people who played at the Velvet Lounge at Fred Anderson's Velvet Lounge, is going to be DJing before that, and she was part of a band of Dr. Lateef's music as well. Um,
Yeah.
Another question comes in about can you talk about some of the instruments behind you? What is the string instrument leaning against the table?
That instrument is called duzungoni, and actually the first person I heard play duzungoni was Don Cherry. Um, and then yeah, so um, that's what that instrument is.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And where does it come from?
Oh, so duzunguni is the hunter's guitar. It's from Mali. It's
Uh-huh.
played by the Bambara, and it's a very when you pick up these instruments, each one represents almost some kind of molecular physical resonance dynamic of the culture. I mean, one of the incredible things, and one of the things I love about being a percussionist, and gathering instruments that I play and develop best I can, is that um, they're sort of the physical. Why did they decide that that's what they want? I mean, look at this here. This little kalimba from Uganda, right? So who figured this out, first of all, and how did they decide that this is what works, right? I mean, so here's where you have this beginning of this incredible diversity of what human beings, the inventiveness of what music music brings out, and then why is that the cultural uh, expression of that works right for them, so for any of us. So this is an amazing thing about the instruments. And the instruments will, a lot of times, of course, I study and I've studied the traditions, but the instruments also, they'll teach you how to play them once you have a certain mindset of how to listen to the instrument. And of course you have to have a technique. But my way of being an autodidact on all the instruments, particularly my hand drums that I've developed the most virtuosity on, is that I let my ideas lead the technique. So if
Mm-hmm.
you hear something and you have to figure out how to do it, then that's when what we call practice, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, one last call to our listeners, people who've joined us for any other questions. Um, while we're doing that, I wanted to ask you about the book that is sitting behind you. That looks like the book that you are. Is that the book?
Where is it? Yeah.
Is that the book that you will be releasing in
Yeah, we'll
September?
have them at the con. It's actually released now.
Uh-huh.
We decided to release it today, and I put it on Bandcamp, and we're sending them all over the world already. It's amazing. Anyway, this is this, I can't, all right, anyway,
You got it.
this
You
kind of
got it.
relates to what we're talking about, because the materials in here are what I've developed through my work with Go Organic Orchestra. So there's matrices, and there's what I call the cosmograms. These are all
Mm-hmm.
interval systems, and then these let me see if I can find them here. These ostinatos of circularity, which is a way of representing rhythm makes. And then there's a bunch of philosophical essays too. I wrote a bunch about my thoughts about music. Man, I wrote a short story after that, but I won't tell it now. But an idea about how music came into being.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I'll save that for another time. But so that's yeah, it's the second book. First book I did was called Pure Rhythm. It's all just rhythms from all over the world, and my own rhythms, but none of it's done in Western notation. The thing is, notation, and the reason I got involved in these cosmograms and matrices that we're going to use on the concert in September as the score materials, is that they allow for more interpretive design and for the musicians to bring their own language, sound, feeling to the material. So for example, we don't just always want to play all 12 tones randomly, but
Mm-hmm.
we want to be focused on a certain topic, like a raga or like playing a blues, and focusing in on these things, and then combining that with the ostinatos of circularity to work with the idea of form, you know. Um, so yeah, and it's all there in service of, like, when your music is prototypical, then I think the spiritual, humanistic, individual aspect of it becomes more universal and shines through. That's why we do it that way, rather than trying to recreate something.
Right. Right. Mr. Rudolph, thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.